You know, when you're working with a client in a past event, a lot can be happening all at once. Thoughts and feelings are arising in response to what's happening. And, you know, if the event has a lot of emotion in it, it can be overwhelming for the client and for you. So today I've got some tips to help you sort of tweak your technique when you're clearing an event from the past. So let's get going. Now, when you're processing an event from the past, if it feels like you're taking on too much, you probably are. Trust your gut on that. The trick is to think in terms of increments of change. You don't have to deal with it all at once. You know, there's that saying, Rome wasn't built in a day. Well, neither was the problem. So you don't have to deal with everything at once. What you can do is you can chunk things down into manageable bites. Makes it much easier for you and for the client. So, and you know, it also allows you to be much more thorough because you just work with one little piece at a time. So an event it's a story. That's what we're working with. Any event is a story, and like any story, it has a beginning and a middle and an end. So what you can do is you can segment the event and just deal with one part of it, one piece of it at a time. This is called titrating, by the way. Now the beginning, it's whatever was happening before the upset occurs. So the client was feeling okay, they were feeling safe, they were happy, all was well with the world, and then something happened. Something suddenly occurred that caused all of that to change for the client. So that's the beginning, everything leading up to that moment. The end is whatever happened immediately after the event. So after it was all over, what happened? And then the middle, of course, is, you know, all the drama that played out during the upset. So you can break it down into those three key pieces, and then if you need to, you can break it down even further into little segments. The middle is where you uncover all the key elements, all of the aspects that you want to release and resolve. That's where all the disruption took place. That's the source of the problem. That's the cause of the internal conflict. So you want to uncover who and what and when and where and how and all of the aspects that are involved in that disruption. There is always a peak to the event. So right in the middle, there's going to be a peak somewhere. And the peak or a spike in the energy of the event, that's a critical moment where the intensity, the energy intensity or the emotional intensity was the greatest. And that's what the client would call the worst part. So you want to identify that. What's the worst part? Because that's when the energy disruption seems to be too much. It's maxing out. But here's the thing, it's also the turning point in the event. It's the turning point in the story because that's the point where the energy is going to start to dissipate as well from this point on. So you can release right after that moment. You can release right before that moment. You don't have to be right on it. Now everything has been building up to that moment. So if you release everything leading up to it, it's going to drain off the pressure. It's like the crest of a hill, the top of a bell curve. And that's where all the energy is coming to a peak. So to thoroughly clean out an event, you want to address all three parts of the story. You want to get the beginning, so what's happening beforehand that causes the child to not be prepared for that sudden unexpected shock that happens. There's the middle where all the drama is playing out and where the energy has a spike, where it peaks, the worst moment. And then there's the ending. The ending is whatever happens after. So that moment of surprise is simply the child didn't see it coming. It was unexpected. So you want to look for shock or confusion and then release that. That's right on the tail end of the beginning. Then there's the worst part. That's the spike. It could be anything. Could be something that was said, could be something that was done, could be a look, could be any perception at all. So you want to identify that because that can be a trigger for the client later on. The problem with the overall a traumatic event is that there was something that wasn't there that the child needed. Something was missing. So you want to identify what that is. There was a lack of ability, for example. The child didn't have the ability to cope with what was happening, or didn't have the ability to make sense of what was happening. It created some confusion, and as soon as there's confusion, fear is going to follow. Or it could have been a lack of support because someone wasn't there to help. And so that's something you want to pay attention to. Who wasn't there that the child needed to be there? Because there can be unresolved grievances around that as well. So somebody may not be in the event, and you may still have to clear them up as well. And it could just be that the energy of the event was too much for the child to handle alone. And so that aloneness can be a big factor as well. So these are the things that you can resolve once you've identified them. All the aspects of the story that generate stress. So perceptions. These are the 5 sensory perceptions. What is the child seeing? What is the child hearing? What is the child smelling? You know that smell is one of our most primal senses. And so like the smell of alcohol on someone's breath, or the smell of cigarette smoke, or the smell of some kind of food cooking, those sorts of things, those can become triggers. Taste might be a part of the element, and of course sensations in the body as well. So it's a 5 sensory system. Those are our channels. That's how we intake information, and that information then makes an impact on us. Then thoughts arise. Those thoughts are decisions that are being made because of the things that are happening, because of our perceptions. And those decisions will be about self, and about others, and about the world in general. So you want to kind of find out what decisions are being made. What does the child think because of what's happening? And then there are feelings and emotions. Okay, so there's sensations in the body, and there are emotions like fear and anger and sadness because of those things that are happening. Releasing all that emotional intensity that's been trapped in the story all these years will allow the nervous system to finally let go and finally relax. And that's what we want, because that's where the client gets a sense of relief. It's like they can finally breathe, and there's a release, and everything lets go. And that's going to clear the way for a lot of healing to take place. It clears the way for forgiveness to happen, which is where you're going to get the healing. And it's also just going to open the door to a lot more releasing, because the subconscious mind is realizing, oh, I can feel better, I can get this resolved. Stress is an activation of the sympathetic nervous system of the body. Okay, the sympathetic nervous system is the stress response. The other side of that, it works in harmony and in concert with the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relaxation response. So if you release that stress response, the parasympathetic system will kick in, and there will be a relaxation response, which feels really good. So we're always working between those two. Now, the client will feel it in their body, and we want to bring their attention to the body and bring their attention to that sense of relief, no matter how small it might be. You know, one step in the right direction is changing the person's trajectory. We want to notice that. We want to validate that. So any sense of relief, notice it, because that's a releasing of that stress response. And as that happens, the more they release the stress that's been trapped inside, the more they're going to be able to think more clearly, because stress inhibits cognition. You can't think when you're in a flight response. So releasing is going to give you a clearer, more insightful client to work with. That stress response is all about flight or fight, okay? A freeze response is basically a flight inward. So it's just fight or flight. The direction doesn't matter. It's how it's being processed in the body. Not being able to make sense of the situation or what's happening is going to trigger a stress response, a fight or flight response. Not being able to take action to meet your own needs because you're just a baby and you can't move, or because you're being held down. Those are threats to survival, not being able to meet your own needs. It brings in the old brain response. That's a primitive response. So release the stress from the body, from the energy system, and the nervous system will relax automatically. And when that happens, the client's going to have more clarity. If they have more clarity, they're going to be able to report more detail. You're going to be able to uncover more information, and you're going to be able to identify what perceptions, what thoughts, what feelings are associated with what's happening. And finally, you want to find out, how does it all end? What happens once it's over? Because the child, the child survived, obviously. They're sitting in your chair. The thing is, the subconscious mind doesn't know that. It's kind of shut the door on that event, but it's still spinning around with the energy that's trapped inside it. So what happens after is there's going to be thoughts and there's going to be feelings that are associated with however it ended. And there can be decisions made that become expectations about how life's going to be from now on because of those things. So that's something that you can just ask the child, so what's life look like because of this, because of what happened? And they're going to tell you, and that becomes the client's life story. Now, it's not always necessary to relieve the intensity of the event. The goal is for the subconscious mind to realize that it's over, that the client survived, they're still alive, they're in the chair, and they're all grown up. That's all we need to get to. That's what allows the brain to actually do the processes that are inherently natural and move that memory into the past. That's where it belongs. So situations of severe trauma can sometimes be resolved simply by going immediately after the event. You don't necessarily have to drag the child kicking and screaming and re-traumatize the client all over again. If it's too much, if it was too much the first time, it's probably too much now. But you can go after the event and you can talk to the child after it happened, even if they don't have all the details. If they've got the feeling, that's all you need. And so you can release the feeling, you can get some clarity from there and process the event in hindsight. So using past tense, because it allows the client to have some distance from that. That's what they need. That provides safety. And then you can clear what happened using past tense. So this happened and I felt and I thought. It's all in the past. The client is still regressed. You still got them. They're just immediately after the event. So they're still in a regressed state. It's just immediately following the event. Only now you can help them to realize, A, they're not alone because you're there with them and you've brought in their adult self. B, they can know that they're safe. They can realize that they made it through, that it's over. Remember, it's just a story. This is just how the memory got processed and how it got stored. And it's all based on the perceptions of the client at the age at which it occurred. So the younger the child, the more misperceptions there's going to be, and whatever has been unresolved, whatever the child couldn't make sense of or didn't know how to cope with, or was unable to really allow itself to feel or process completely, it didn't get stored as a past event. Subconsciously, it's still happening. It's all happening in the moment now. But memories also change with time. You know, memory is not static. It's not recorded on a VCR. Our memories are constantly changing and they continue to evolve. That's why subsequent events can flow back into an ISE and make them stronger. Because the more times we get triggered, the more intensity gets added to the original event. So it's changing. It's getting stronger because of those events. The opposite effect is that as we acquire more knowledge and understanding, that too can flow back into the initial sensitizing event, and it can reduce the volume of emotional intensity and energy that's in that event. This is why hypnotherapy works. This is why we can extinguish the charge that's in an event, because memory isn't static. And it doesn't matter that whether or not the event happened, whether it was an actual event or whether it really happened or not. That's unimportant. What matters is the feelings that got trapped around those perceptions. Remember, the subconscious mind doesn't make a distinction between real and imagined, nor should we. All we're concerned about is whether or not they're still holding on to those feelings and whether or not they feel good. So anything that made an impression that was perceived in any way as a threat, it's going to automatically be stored for future reference. And that's good. That's the protective function of the subconscious mind. That's old brain activity. That's okay. We're not concerned about facts. We're not even looking for facts. We're just looking for the truth as the subconscious mind has it. And that has to do with the perceptions at the time of the event. The truth of how those things made the person feel. That's what we want to know. Once they know the truth, that's when they can make a choice. They can now consciously choose whether they want to keep it or whether they want to change it. Isn't that nice? Once they realize that, they have a choice. And that's the problem. As a child, they didn't have a choice. So when you find yourself in a bit of a rough patch, don't hammer away trying to get the client through. It's too much for them. And if it feels like it's too much for you, it's definitely too much for them. Just chunk down. Work with a smaller segment. Work with just a little piece. Get some relief. Then work with another little piece. You can segment the event. Work on one thing at a time. Work with one perception, one thought, one feeling, just one aspect. Get some relief. You know, one piece of the story at a time. You can get dramatic change doing that. In fact, you can walk the client straight through the event right into their peace. Now, if you're dealing with intense trauma, and sometimes that can come on as a big abreaction, just processing after the fact, processing how it ends, can drain off a lot of the charge that's been held in the actual event. And it will make it easier for the client to deal with that particular event and all the details that are held within it. So what I'll do is if I get a really big intense event, I'll go after the event and I'll clear it in hindsight. Then I will take the client before the event to where they're still feeling good. So they're still feeling safe. And because now what I've done is I've drained off a bunch of the energy out of the actual traumatic event, and I've now taken them to a place where they're safe and secure, knowing they made it through, knowing that they're okay, knowing that nothing really, really, really bad is going to happen because nobody died. And now I have a calmer and hopefully a wiser client that I can work with which to reprocess all of the traumatizing aspects of the event. In this way, it doesn't re-traumatize the client because they have a much more stable perspective on what's happening as you move them through the event. But really, there's no right or wrong way to do things. You know, you really just have to match it to, you know, the capacity of the client, where they're at, what comes up, where the subconscious mind takes you, and what they're capable of dealing with. What's most important is just to work with the client. You know, if it's too much, if it's not safe for them to go there, then make it safe. You know, if you find a way to make it safe for them to deal with that stuff, they will go there willingly. You don't have to bulldoze. There is an ancient Egyptian blessing that I just love, and it's actually a prayer and a blessing, and it is this: may the gods go with you through all the dark and empty places you must go. Isn't that lovely? And isn't that what we're doing? We are guiding our clients through all the dark and empty places they must go, and in that way you are like the gods that go with the client. You go with them through all those dark and empty places. You hold the light on, hold the lantern. You keep the light on as they make their way through, and guide them gently out of darkness into the light, because trauma is being immersed in the darkness, and our job is to bring them back into the light, and we can do that by using a gentler approach. So that's my take on things for this time. 3 things that you can do to clear an event. Just work with the story, work with one little piece at a time, make it easier for the client to face those things, and your job will be that much easier. Be sure to leave your comments on the forum. I want to hear from you. Any insights? If you've got questions, I'm here to help. Be sure to tell me whether or not what I've shared here either confirmed or conflicted with what you already know as well, because I do have a different take on things in some regard, and I really do want to hear what you think. So until next time, this is Wendy. I'll see you real soon.